Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin. We are on lesson 15 of our Ilmul Akhlaq, or our lessons related to the topic of ethics, of morality. And we're going to talk about a vice today called hirs, or greed. So greed is a vice which is described as the desire to possess something while having a feeling of never having enough. So hirs is wanting something while having a feeling of never having enough. No matter if that is that aim of want is money or land or anything else. So greed is a vice. This type of greed is a bad quality. To want something, to want to possess something while having a feeling of never having enough, that is a vice. That person is not content with what they have. The virtue here would be contentment with what they have. Now, greed or hirs is said to be not always a vice. So we can say there's two different types of greed or hirs. There's positive type, and then there's negative type. So greed is said to be not always a vice. The type which is not always a vice is when you're greedy for your time, or to get more thawab, you're greedy to get more thawab. So as long as it has a positive effect, like maybe you want to make sure you do enough good with your time, you want to make sure you obtain and acquire enough thawab, more mercy from Allah, you want to take the time to get closer to Allah. So yes, these things have, there's other rights you have to fulfill. There's things that Allah wants us to do in life. We can't neglect everything. We can't neglect the things we must do or the things right to do. We have to have proper time management as well. But anyways, the positive type of greed is what, like if you want to, as example, you're greedy to get more thawab. It would be positive as long as secondary considerations don't get in the way. So what's that mean? So primarily, when we look at positive greed, it is good as long as a secondary consideration does not interfere and get in the way. Like if there's a secondary consideration of distraction from the obedience to Allah. Distraction from the obedience to Allah, the Exalted. Or not giving rights. So those would be secondary considerations on the primary positive greed, which you have to consider. You have to consider when dealing with primary positive greed, those other considerations. It cannot take you outside of giving the rights that are on you, or distract you from obedience to Allah the Exalted. Hence, when we talk about hirs as a negative attribute, as a negative quality, as a vice in the human being, we are talking about the kind of greed for dunya. So hirs is a vice when it is related to dunya. So here a person has a feeling of wanting this dunya, this low place, this vanishing abode, and not having enough of this vanishing abode. They want dunya and they can't get enough. Dunya is like salt water. You drink it, and drink it, still your thirst is not quenched until you're ruined by it. So here, this is a negative type of greed when it relates to dunya and you're not content with what you have. So you're never having enough. This is greed which is negative. So this is a negative type of hirs. This condition of greed, of hirs, as a vice, causes mankind to be dissatisfied with whatsoever he or she has. So this vice, this person who has this vice, they'll be dissatisfied, uncontent with whatever they have. The food's not good enough. The relations with people are not good enough. The home's not good enough. The car's not good enough. Nothing's good enough. No contentment. And it causes him or her to yearn for more because they're not content. So they're going to be greedy for more. They want a faster car, different car, many cars, many houses, bigger house, more than they need. So this is a destructive vice. This is a destructive quality to have in a person. And it's not limited only to worldly possessions either. So it can be about other types of desires. Like it can be related to the shahwiyah, the shahwat. It can be related to the sexual desires, the appetitive desires like food and drink, and other things. So it doesn't need to be about a physical possessed item like a car, or a sofa, or a TV, or a house. It can be about other dunya related things like sexual pleasures, food and drink, and other things. So we have a hadith mentioned in Kitab al-Kafi in volume 2. It says Ali ibn Ibrahim al-Kumi. He narrates from his father, Abihi. And Abihi. It's from his father, Ibrahim ibn Hashim al-Kumi. From Ibn Abi Umair. From Hisham ibn Salim. From Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, Imam Sadiq. Kala, he said, with every door Allah opens upon a servant, with every door that Allah opens upon a servant from the affairs of dunya, amri dunya, so with every door, they transinterpret it, with every door that Allah opens, ma. So with every door that Allah opens of the affairs of dunya, for his upon his servant, upon a servant, except Allah opens upon him min al hirs, min al hirs, like it. So with every door that Allah opens for a servant from the dunya, He also opens a door of greed like it upon him. So they transinterpreted this hadith, which you can see on your screen there, as is with every door of worldly affairs that Allah opens to a servant, He also opens a door of greed to him. So everything that you get in dunya, everything that you achieve in dunya that's dunya related, remember that you also have a door of greed opened upon you with that door of dunya you have. So you have two doors open. You got something in dunya, but you also got a door of hirs, of greed. So regulate it. Fear Allah. Be careful. For there is a door of hirs here. We have another hadith narrated from him, the narrator of the, I think the narrator is not mentioned here in our slides, but you can find, if you go back the narration before it, probably in Kitab al-Kafi. So from Ahmed ibn Muhammad, from Ali ibn Nu'man, from Abu Osama Zayd, from Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, who has said the following: the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi had said, one who is not comforted and satisfied with relief from Allah, his soul will be torn to pieces due to the sorrow for the world. One who follows his eyes to what is in the hands of people, what is in the hands of the people, his depressed condition will increase and his anguish will not cease. One who does not appreciate Allah's bounties, besides food, drinks, and clothes, his deeds fall short and his suffering draws near. So one who is not satisfied and comforted by the relief of Allah, his soul will be torn to pieces. Why is it torn to pieces? Because he has sorrow. He has sorrow upon dunya. Hasarat ala dunya. One who follows his eyes to what is in the hands of the people. What happens to the person who follow his eyes? They follow what is in the hands of people. His depressed condition will increase and his anguish will not cease. And one who does not appreciate Allah's bounties, besides food, drink, and clothes, this person's deeds fall short and his suffering draws near. Adhabuhu. We have another hadith from Muhammad ibn Yahya, who has narrated from, so the last one was, okay. So from Muhammad ibn Yahya, who has narrated from Ahmad ibn Muhammad, from Ibn Mahbub, from Abdullah ibn Sinan, and Abdul Aziz al-Abdi. There's two narrators here. So you have two narrators here. You have Abdullah ibn Sinan. So from Abdullah ibn Sinan and Abdul Aziz al-Abdi. From who? From Abdullah ibn Abi Yafur, from Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who said, whoever passes the nights and days with the world as his biggest concern, whoever passes the mornings and evenings and dunya akbaro hamihi, dunya is his most biggest concern. Ja'ala Allah Ta'ala, Allah places poverty between his eyes, makes his affairs chaotic, and he will receive of the world only what Allah has made his allocated share of the world. So you can see the Arabic may be better, but we're reading the English of it, a transinterpretation of it. It continues. Whoever passes nights and days with the next life, with al-akhirah, as his biggest concern, Allah places wealth in his heart. Again, this is the asbaha wal amsa. Whoever passes the asbaha and wal amsa with wal akhirah, with the akhirah, akhbaru hamihi, with the akhirah is the biggest concern. Ja'ala Allah. Allah makes richness fi kalbihi, in his heart. Wa jama'a lahu amrahu. So Allah takes care of his affairs. He takes care for him his affairs. Jama'a. This could have some maybe a better translation, but they transinterpreted it as sets his affairs in an orderly manner. So it just goes the meaning of what's being read here is what they're trying to translate. So the virtue which opposes the vice of hirs is called contentment. So this is to be satisfied. Contentment is to be satisfied with what Allah has granted and bestowed upon you. That's what contentment is. Contentment is to be satisfied and content with what Allah the Exalted has bestowed upon you, of the blessings that He is giving you. To happiness, to be content. Having contentment is a key to happiness. And when a person faces trials, because they're content with what Allah has bestowed upon them, it'll be much more easier in those trials. During those trials and after those trials will be much more easier on them. So this is the virtue you want to establish against hirs. Also, we should consider the harms and effects of hirs, of greed. First, greed leads to many other sins. Many other sins. Like a person may be greedy for more property, they may steal. Greedy for more money, they may steal, do usury, earn haram income. Or a person may be greedy for sexual desires, they may commit zina, they may commit haram looks. A person may be greedy for more rights than are his, so they'll get angry, abuse people, hurt people. So greed can lead, hirs can lead to many other sins. Very harmful. Second thing is that greed causes discontentment and disappointment. This discontentment and disappointment also leads to exhaustion. A person who is having a feeling of never having enough is on a never-ending pursuit and a quest for filling a void and feeding this greed, which in the end will result in disappointment. In the end, they will reach discontent, disappointment with it. They will not reach their aim. Because they fail to obtain their aims. And even if they reach some of their desires, at what cost did they reach it? They wanted more money, they were greedy, they took rights of people, they did usury, they did so much where they deserve hell for so many years that Allah is the one who's going to account him. For what? For his lousy 30, 40 years with the wealth that he isn't going to even use just to have big numbers in a bank account, to be inherited by his heirs, distributed. For what? What was it worth? At what cost did his greed bring him to this? Even if he got some of his desires, at what cost? The third harm and effects of greed, of hirs, is never satisfied. A person who has this greed, they'll never be satisfied, never be content. So how do we diagnose hirs? How do we diagnose if someone is greedy or if we're being greedy? First thing that we can do is, if you could use all of these things mentioned, and there may be more, but you could use these as tools to try to diagnose if you have this illness or not. The first thing is, if a person cannot differentiate between a need and a want. There's a difference. Sometimes somebody may need something and want it. Sometimes they may want it but not need it. So if a person cannot differentiate between the two, they cannot distinguish between need and want, this is a sign that they're greedy. They may have hirs in them. Hence, if this is the case, one is likely greedy. Maybe they're greedy. Now here, what you could do is, if you want to find a criteria of what is need and what is want, you can base your idea of need on urf, on common consideration. And you should also be fair to your soul. Be fair to your soul. So like, if it is normal for your family to have some things they don't direly need, like some sweets, they don't need those sweets. They want the sweets. You could have the sweets. They want it, but it's okay. But if you want to say, stuff yourself with sweets every day, then maybe that is something you want, but you don't need. You see? But if it is greed, more than reasonable needs and wants, then that may be hirs. So if it's more than reasonable needs and wants, then that may be hirs. Second way to diagnose greed is to constantly compare your life with others. If you're so the second way to say maybe you have greed is if you constantly compared your life with others. So if you're doing this practice of comparing your life to others, you may feel depressed. You may start to feel disappointed and disappointment and dissatisfaction when you see that others have more than you. Or you may be discontent with what you have and overlook the big blessings that you do have. So this is a sign that you may have greed if you constantly compare your life with others, what you have with what others have. The third possible indication of hirs is envy. Many times a person has envy because of greed. Envy is when someone has something good and you don't want them to have it. You don't want them to have that good. Like you see your neighbor got a new car. You don't want him to have that car. You don't think he deserves it. You don't want him to have it. You want that exact car for yourself. You don't want him to have it. I should have it, not him. So this is envy. You see something that somebody else has, you don't want them to have it, you want yourself to have it. That's envy. So these are three possible ways to diagnose hirs, greed. First is if you cannot differentiate between a need and a want. The second is if you're constantly comparing your life and the things you have with others and what they have. The third is if you have envy. But what are the causes of greed? The causes of greed are first, love of dunya love. The dunya side of the life looks very appealing and adorned. It looks sweet. Hence, many people may fall deeply in love with the dunya. And they may become seduced into it. And then they become imprisoned in the shackles of dunya. They become chained in its bondage. They become yoked by its yokes. And they become the slave of dunya. They become the worshipper of dunya. So when you have hubbat dunya, the love of the world, that's a cause of greed. When you are sick in the soul with hubbat dunya, and you're a slave of the world, you have greed for the world. Another cause for hirs, for greed, is that we sometimes may think that dunya is what makes us happy and joyful. Although a certain level of halal enjoyment is a good thing. Halal enjoyment is a good thing. We're not saying to live in a cave and cut off all joy. You need some kind of human relaxation, some joys to enjoy the blessings that Allah the Exalted has given you within the obedience to Allah, not in disobedience to Allah. So those things are fine if it's in the right place, of course. But people may make a major mistake and go wrong by thinking the more we have of dunya, the more we will be happy. It's not that way. It's vanishing temporal and you're accountable later. And you become vice-ridden. You become diseased if you don't watch yourself. If you don't become a true moral person. And also by worshiping dunya and letting it take the place of Allah the Exalted in our hearts. So we have to be very careful when it comes to dunya. So how do we treat this illness? How do we cure this illness? How are we going? What's the prescription that the Akhlaqi doctor will give to treat hirs? The first thing is to learn to be content. You can deny yourself from looking at what others have, and with taqwa, train your nafs to be content. You can look at those who are who are having less than you have. Also, another way to train yourself to be content and appreciate what you have. So learn to be content. By firstly, you could deny yourself from looking at what others have, and with taqwa, train yourself, your nafs, to be content, to appreciate what it has. Second, you can look at those who have less than you, those people who have less than you, and train yourself to be content and appreciate what you have. One of my teachers, he went to those who are in poverty, and he told us that he asked to see what they were cooking, and he looked in the pot. You see that they're just potatoes. Just some potatoes for this family, for these people. Look at those who have less than what you have to learn contentment with what you have. The second treatment is learn and understand the true nature of dunya. Dunya will destroy you if you rely on it. If you worship dunya, you'll be destroyed. So you must remind yourself of its traps. You must remind yourself of the lures of dunya. This dunya is temporal, fading, and a vanishing place. It's not the eternal happiness. It's not the highest aim. It's an abode of tests and trials and difficulties. So know the real nature of dunya. Third treatment that could be prescribed for hirs is to remind yourself and understand that more is not better. Remind yourself and understand that more is not better. You have one pair of shoes that's good enough. You don't need another one that's just extra. You don't need 3 or 4, as an example. So train yourself and remind yourself and understand that more is not actually better. Rather, having more means that you're having more tests, more trials. The more you have, the more you may be accounted for. So more is not better when it comes to dunya. More thawab, more good deeds, yes. Not when it comes to dunya things. Fourth treatment is remember and remind yourself of paradise's pleasures. The dunya is unworthy compared to such pleasures, which are better than the things on earth. So remind yourself of what is in the hereafter. For those who believe and do righteous deeds, remind yourself what kind of mercies Allah, the Exalted, has told us about. Fifth treatment is to consider and look at the lives of the Prophet Sallallahu and the Imams alayhim salam. Look how they lived, trying to analyze what their lives were like. So this is on greed, on hirs, and I will end this lesson here. Well, after Dawana and Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.